Ever since Xi Jinping took power in 2013, China has undergone a dramatic military transformation, with the world's largest navy, advanced missiles, and around 500 nuclear weapons, solidifying its undeniable military might. But why this relentless buildup? Is it merely about extending geopolitical influence, a logical pursuit for any rising power? While military strength can bolster a nation's voice in international negotiations, the true motive runs deeper: territorial control. China's ambitions extend beyond mere influence, with a strong desire to reclaim territories like Taiwan and the South China Sea, driving its expansion. The artificial islands built in the South China Sea are not just symbols. They're military fortresses strategically positioned to dominate key maritime routes. This raises questions about the global consequences. How would trade be impacted if China controlled these waters? And what would happen if the US decided to challenge Beijing's grip? In this video, we delve into the strategic significance of these islands, why China built them, and what might occur if the US Navy took control. To understand why the South China Sea is so crucial, let's begin with China's historical claim to the region. According to China, its claim dates back to the Han Dynasty, 206 BC, 220 AD, which recorded shipborne voyages through the waters and sent explorers to chart parts of Asia beyond China's land borders. This exploration continued during the Song Dynasty, and by then, China started claiming and naming territory in the South China Sea, including the Spratly and Paracel Islands. As trade took Chinese explorers deeper into Southeast Asia, Beijing asserts that historical records show China's near-total control over the South China Sea. However, this control waned in the 19th century with the rise of Vietnam's Nguyen Dynasty and the arrival of European explorers, which led to challenges against Chinese dominance. Eventually, Japan's militarization pushed out both European and Vietnamese claims, and by 1942, Japan controlled much of Southeast Asia, including the South China Sea. After World War II, with Japan's defeat, China sought to regain control of the region, citing its historical claims. Yet, international maritime law established that large parts of the South China Sea fall outside of any nation's control, meaning the waters should be free for commercial and military use. China disputes this, creating maps with a 9-dash line, which visualizes its territorial claims, asserting both sovereignty over islands and historic rights based on the Han and Song dynasties. This line stretches from China's southern coast, curving along the Spratlys, and extends to include Taiwan. This brings us to the question of artificial islands. Under maritime law, countries can create exclusive economic zones, EEZs, extending 200 nautical miles from their coastlines, granting full control over ships and aircraft within these zones. However, China's EEZs cover only a small part of the South China Sea, while countries like Vietnam, Malaysia, and the Philippines also control portions of the sea. Much of the South China Sea falls outside of these zones, subject to international maritime law, which China seeks to change through the construction of artificial islands. Between December 2013 and October 2015, China built a trio of artificial islands totaling around 3,000 acres in size on a collection of 7 coral reefs within the South China Sea. These reefs are part of the Spratly Islands, over which China lays claim, despite the fact that these islands are closer to Malaysia, Vietnam, and the Philippines than to China. The Spratly Islands, which are more accurately described as a collection of large rocks rather than inhabitable islands, are situated almost at the center of the South China Sea. This makes them an ideal location for China to build artificial islands and assert its claims, allowing it to create exclusive economic zones, EEZs, and control waters beyond its mainland borders. The construction of these islands has sparked controversy from the beginning. Some commentators, including U.S. Pacific Fleet Commander Admiral Harry Harris, dubbed them the Great Wall of Sand in April 2015. While not the first artificial islands in the region, Japan, for example, built the island of Odaiba off the coast of Tokyo Bay in the 1850s. China's approach has been much larger in scale and speed, causing significant damage to the coral reefs on which the islands are built. Fisheries in the surrounding area were also disrupted, and it is feared that China will continue to use these islands to further disrupt fishing in the region. But the primary concern for the international community lies in the militarization of these artificial islands. By March 2022, reports emerged that China had fully militarized at least 3 of the islands, equipping them with anti-aircraft and anti-ship defenses, fighter jets, and laser and jamming equipment. This militarization contradicts past claims by President Xi that China would not turn its artificial islands into military bases. U.S. Admiral John C. Aquilino has criticized China for using its islands to flex its military muscle, stating that the buildup of weaponization is destabilizing the region. The creation of these artificial islands raises further questions about why China built them in the first place. As we've already discussed, China aims to assert its claim over the Spratly Islands and, by extension, to govern much of the South China Sea. This was made clear when the U.S. flew a P-8A Poseidon aircraft over the Spratlys and received a message from China asserting sovereignty over the islands. However, this sovereignty is not recognized internationally, with the U.S. pilot responding that the aircraft was conducting lawful military activities beyond the national airspace of any coastal state, in accordance with international maritime law. Despite this, the pilot also pointed out that flying over or sailing near these islands places the aircraft or ship within range of Chinese missile installations, which is precisely the point. By constructing and militarizing these artificial islands, China is reinforcing its claim to sovereignty over the South China Sea, a claim that is disputed by the rest of the world. If China can have these islands recognized under maritime law, it would be able to establish exclusive economic zones around them, granting it more control over the critical shipping lanes of the South China Sea. But China's actions are not only aimed at consolidating control over the sea, they also serve as a constant threat to other countries that dispute China's claim to the Spratly Islands. According to the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, China is not the only nation that claims all or part of the Spratlys. Vietnam and Taiwan also claim the islands in their entirety, while Malaysia and the Philippines claim portions of them. As a result, the Spratly Islands have become highly militarized, with 45 of the islands hosting small numbers of soldiers from each of the 5 countries involved, creating a standoff among them. Brunei also claims a continental shelf overlapping the southern reef of the Spratlys, though it does not lay claim to the islands themselves. This ongoing military posturing by 5 nations has been a fixture in the region for decades. By constructing artificial islands in the vicinity, China has significantly bolstered its military presence, allowing it to exert influence in ways that other countries with smaller garrisons on the islands cannot. China now controls 3,000 acres of land, allowing it to conduct missile strikes, launch aircraft, and jam enemy systems. This creates a clear threat to Malaysia, Vietnam, Taiwan, and the Philippines, and it's a threat none of these nations can effectively counter. They lack the resources to build artificial islands of their own. Beyond military power, there are practical reasons for China building these islands. Sovereignty over the Spratly Islands would give China control over much of the South China Sea, but it would also grant access to extensive oil and gas deposits. The U.S. Energy Information Administration, EIA, estimates that the region contains between 0.9 billion and 3 billion barrels of oil, along with potential natural gas deposits ranging from none to 16.2 trillion cubic feet. This makes the region crucial for China's energy security. In 2023, China imported 11.3 million barrels of crude oil per day, highlighting its dependence on foreign resources. Even with the relatively small amount of oil from the Spratlys, enough to last for only 265 days, control of the region would help reduce China's reliance on outside suppliers. Moreover, China could profit from the reserves without necessarily using them domestically, strengthening its claim over the South China Sea, which may contain up to 9.2 billion barrels of oil. These artificial islands also play a crucial role in China's military strategy. As tensions escalate with neighboring countries in the South China Sea, China needs to prepare for potential conflicts. The artificial islands provide military bases from which attacks could be launched, but their primary role is to support China's Air Force. Despite having the world's 3rd largest air force, with 3,304 aircraft, 2,478 of which are combat-ready, China faces a limitation, a lack of refueling aircraft. While the U.S. boasts a fleet of 606 tanker aircraft, China only has 10. Tankers are critical in modern warfare, as they extend the range of aircraft and reduce time lost from having to land for fuel. Though China is developing the Xi'an Y-20 to improve its refueling capabilities, its current reliance on its aircraft carriers and the artificial islands for refueling is vital to its wartime strategy in the South China Sea. Having established China's territorial claims, the militarization of the islands, and the strategic importance of these artificial islands, we now arrive at the big question: what would happen if the United States took control of these islands? To answer this, we must first understand the extent of the militarization of these islands and how the U.S. perceives them. In January 2020, Gregory B. Poling, a senior fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, published an analysis on China's artificial islands. Poling, an expert on South China Sea affairs, argued that the United States is operating under the mistaken belief that it could easily neutralize these islands in a potential conflict with China. According to Poling, the islands would allow China to dominate both the waters and air over the South China Sea, giving it an early advantage in any conflict with the U.S. He notes that China has already used these artificial islands to support operations in the region, exerting what he calls peacetime coercion to push countries like Vietnam and Malaysia into conceding their maritime rights to Beijing. Poling delves deeper into the militarization of the islands, pointing out that China has constructed fighter jet hangars on several of its artificial islands, including Fiery Cross, Subi Reefs, and Mischief, which together house 72 hangars. These, along with 16 additional hangars on Woody Island, position China as the first mover in any naval conflict with the U.S. in the South China Sea, potentially allowing it to establish aerial superiority. Additionally, China has deployed anti-ship missile systems, such as the YJ-12B and YJ-62, which could pose significant threats to American vessels operating in the area. The YJ-12B, for instance, has a range of about 285 miles, enough to strike U.S. ships operating within China's Claimed Exclusive Economic Zones, EEZ. These missile systems, combined with long-range missiles from the mainland and radar capabilities on the islands, would make it difficult for the U.S. to launch a surprise attack. Poling suggests that while the U.S. could theoretically take control of the artificial islands, doing so would come at a significant cost. American aircraft carriers positioned too close to the islands would be vulnerable to missile strikes from both the islands and the mainland. The U.S. would likely need to station its carriers in the Celebes or Sulu Seas and rely heavily on its tanker fleet for aerial support. The U.S. would also face significant challenges in disabling the island bases, as China has integrated sophisticated air defenses, such as HQ-9 surface-to-air missiles, which would complicate missile strikes. Poling estimates that it would take at least 400 missiles to cripple the base's operations, but the U.S. would also have to contend with China's ability to deploy a large naval fleet, diverting attention away from its submarines, which would be key to the strike. However, Poling also outlines possible solutions for the U.S. and its allies. By leveraging existing defense agreements with South Korea, Japan, and the Philippines, the U.S. could form a coalition to counter China's militarization of the South China Sea. The Philippines, which has an enhanced defense cooperation agreement with the U.S., could serve as a strategic base for aerial operations, allowing the U.S. to bypass the need for carriers in the South China Sea. This alliance could also provide a platform for creating a unified front against China's territorial ambitions, potentially bringing countries like Vietnam, Malaysia, and Taiwan into the fold. Ultimately, Poling concludes that while the U.S. could succeed in taking China's artificial islands, the operation would come with heavy costs in terms of military assets and casualties. The key question that follows is what would happen to the islands afterward. The U.S. could face international pressure to deactivate or destroy the islands to comply with international maritime law. Alternatively, a diplomatic solution could involve a multilateral agreement allowing countries that claim the Spratly Islands to maintain a presence on the artificial islands, creating a united opposition to China's territorial expansion. This approach, while complex, could help establish a more balanced geopolitical situation in the Indo-Pacific, reducing China's ability to monopolize the South China Sea.